In these articles, I talk about the six fields of China de-Americanization process in the past 7 years or past 8 years. One is the de-Americanization of trade, and the de-Americanization of finance, and de-Americanization of security, and de-Americanization of ideology, and de-Americanization of high tech, and de-Americanization of education. So I list a lot of database to show and prove my observation. And I think, as you asked, the so-called de-Americanization strategy is not something China proactively presumed, but rather something it was forced into by the United States. In fact, since China reform and opening up in 1978, China has consistently sought to establish a friendly relationship with the United States, adopting an open policy towards the U.S., attracting American investment, in increasing a trade with the U.S., and learning from the management experience of American company and the financial market. But I give you a very horrible, a very huge data. That is, by the 2016, by 2016, about 20% of China foreign trade was dependent on the United States. Frankly, I admit this independence benefited China in the past. But however, soon after, during his first term, President Trump began implementing policy to contain China, launching a trade war against China, detaining Huawei, Miss Meng Wanzhou, and imposing sanctions on thousands of Chinese companies, including Huawei. And this containment policy made China feel threatened and promoting countermeasures and adjustment. And as I point out in an article published in New York Times in August 2022, I said the Chinese people have now awakened and no longer hold the United States in such a high regard. And the Chinese people increasingly believe that relying on the US, as they did in the past, is dangerous. From this perspective, it was United States that forced China to adopt the so-called de-Americanization strategy. And I also wrote in another articles this year that I said the Chinese people should actually thank Trump, because President Trump was like an excellent political education teacher, teaching Chinese people to see through American hypocrisy and cruelty of the international society or international community. And more importantly, President Trump teaching us how to take necessary countermeasures to defend our country's core interest in modernization process. So this is what I mean, the so-called de-Americanization's purpose. Since China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, China has increasingly emphasized the cooperation with the country in global south. And the total bilateral trade between China and Russia, China and Central Asia, China and Latin America, China and Africa, China, Southeast Asia has grown by more than 10% annually. And meanwhile, total trade between China and the United States has seen a relatively decline over the past decade. So these I call the de-Americanization, or these structural adjustments has also led to China becoming less relies on the U.S. in its trade relationship, as you mentioned right now. For example, I give you some data. 5 years ago, bilateral trade between China and Russia was only slightly over 100 billion US dollars. But now, 5 years later, now it has reached 250 billion US dollars, and it is expected to exceed 300 billion US dollars in the next 5 years. The bilateral trade between China and Latin America has already surpassed 500 billion US dollars, and it is likely to exceed the total trade between China and the US in the next 5 years. Because nowadays, this year, the bilateral trade between China and US is only about maybe 500 billion US dollars. So that means in other words, in China foreign trade landscape, Latin American may become more important than the United States in the next 5 years, right? That's I think a diversification. So therefore, in my view, the US will still be a very important trading partner for China in the future, but its importance is declining. The strategic result of China de-Americanization of trade is that China global trade structure has become more balanced and more secure. This is a key reason. This is a key reason why China countermeasure against the U.S. trade war this year, in 2025, was so successful. Now, China is not afraid of the U.S. in the trade war. On the contrary, as many media outlets have reported, the U.S. has already lost the U.S.-China trade war of 2025. The main reason is that the U.S. share in China foreign trade landscape is declining. As I said, in 2015, U.S.-China trade accounting for about 20% of China total foreign trade, but now it is only 9%. And on the other hand, the rebalancing of China's foreign trade structure is beneficial to the development of countries around the world. China has exported more high quality and affordable goods to the world, achieving a democratization of goods, democratization of production, and helping developing countries in global south benefit from the China development. As you know, it is very important to remember that in the past, the Western country, in the past, the developing country imported too many Western products. Those products were of good quality, but too expensive. But now, China has launched a price revolution in foreign trade. So global south country can buy more high-quality Chinese goods at the same prices, thereby gaining more benefits. So that's I often say that it's a key reason I said why I often say that China's rise is beneficial to the world. So in the past, we often think that we are in our memories that in the past China made in China the quality is not very good and the price is very cheap. But currently, China's production become more and more high quality, right? For example, the EV car, the solar production, the electrical production a lot. So that's why I think China now has launched international price revolution. This international price revolution, I think, is beneficial to the global south country. Nowadays, in many fields, China's high-tech productions catch up with U.S. high-tech production. And I think this is a very good thing for China. Our confidence recovered and rise up very, very quickly because in the past 7 years, when President Trump launched a high-tech war to China, contain Huawei company and a lot, and I think this is a very serious, very huge competition, high-tech competition happened in the past 7 years. But in my opinion, the high-tech products are not inclusive to the United States. The US cannot monopolize the research and the development and the productions of all high-tech products. None can it profit excessively from a monopoly on high tech. None can it weaponize high tech to suppress other countries, including China. So I think the competition in high tech should be fair and market-based. As an emerging economy, China has achieved a technological breakthrough in more and more fields through continued increasing in technological investment and research. This is perfectly normal and this is perfectly successful. I think China has not stopped, none ceased, none engaging in colonialism. So the U.S. has no reason to accuse China of being, as you mentioned, unfriendly or anything else. Some voice I heard in U.S. newspaper or U.S. media, they claim that China is stealing American technology. I think this view is also unfair because I give you a very interesting example. In history, everyone knows in history that paper making, the compass, and the gunpowder were invented in China more than 1,000 years ago. And later, the US and the Western country adopted these inventions and propelled the technological revolution. China didn't presume the US for stealing China's technology in ancient age, right? Similarly, China is now innovating based on existing American high-tech products and technology, even suppressing in the US, for example, in high-speed railway infrastructure, in EV car, in solar energy. As this is an action that benefits humanity and promotes the development of human civilization. So I believe that the current high-tech competition between China and the US is normal. China scientists are adopting to this competition, and China China social scientists are also viewing this competition rationally. We should not judge this competition through an ideological lens. The US should not use political means, especially financial sanctions, extraterritorial jurisdiction, and technological blockades to respond to China's technological competition. On the contrary, I think the US should embrace this technological competition with a more open mindset. I think the technological competition should be healthy. The results of the technological competition between US and China, I think in the future, will ultimately benefit all of the humanity if we have the rational competition of high tech. I think, in fact, the process of the rest country, I mean, because you mentioned the West and the rest, right? Yeah. So all the process of the rest country developing their own development model can be seen as de-Americanization. Because as we all know, for the past half century, most of the countries' modernization process have been modeled after the United States. The late Harvard professor Samuel Huntington, we all know him, argued many years ago. He wrote a book. He said, since the 1970s, human political development model have entered a third wave, right? And another very famous professor, Francis Fukuyama, he spoke of about the end of history. Both of them referring to the convergence of the many countries' model towards the American development model. Of course, we admire the American, we worship American development model. But the problem is that in the 2008 international financial crisis, as you mentioned, especially since Trump took office in 2017, people in the world have been re-evaluating their development paths and readjusting their relationship with the United States. For example, emerging economies such as Russia, Brazil, India, Indonesia are all re-examining their national development positioning and identity. These countries are seeking to defend their national security and pursue their own development paths in areas such as political development model, economic market mechanism, financial instruments, and military security system. I think China is no exception. First, China must ensure the security of its political system. China does not want to repeat the patterns of Soviet Union collapse. China will not allow the United States to instigate a color revolution in China. Over the past 20 years, many countries in the world have experienced color revolution linked to the United States. Secondly, China must also ensure its economic, trade, and financial autonomy, as we mentioned, preventing the United States from controlling China's economic lifeline. In fact, many country economies are controlled by the United States due to the excessive dependence on it, especially some countries in Latin America. So these can be called new colonization, new colonialism. Thirdly, I think China must pursue its own technological and military security. China must prevent the U.S. from stifling its technological and military development and threatening it in the long term. And also, China has to promote our reunification. Right? We have to solve the Taiwan issues in the coming years. And finally, China must have its own independent knowledge and ideology system to prevent being colonized by the American ideology and knowledge. And of course, this Americanization process does not mean a completely decoupling from the United States, but rather we find a normal relationship with the US, neither completely dependent on the US, none avoiding necessary cooperation. I can give you a very interesting example. I don't know whether it is right. I said in the past, China and the US relationship were like those of close lovers, especially in 1980 or 1990, 2000, after the September 11 happened. China supports, U.S. anti-terrorism war, and we have a very good relationship. And even in 2008, and Beijing Olympic Game, U.S. president come to Beijing and celebrate with China president for the Beijing Olympic Game, right? That's a very good relationship many years ago, like a close lover. But in the future, I hope that China-U.S. relationship will be like those of normal neighbors. Neighbors sometimes have some kind of a conflict, but they also interact. And when faced with common difficulties, they help each other. So I think, but the bottom line is that the military conflict between U.S. and China must be avoided at all costs, as it would benefit no one. So I think that in the future, the U.S. and China relationship will be back to a normal relationship. So that's why we back to your last question, education, because now China education also need to maintain a normal relationship with the United States. Why I say normal? Because in the past, China education development was abnormal or unnormal. You may not know that 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, in a Chinese university, the vast majority of textbook for economics, political science, international relations, finance, sociology, law, management, psychology, even history and philosophy came from the United States. You may not know. Most. Even I teach my students, many years ago, maybe about 10 years ago, I have to use the U.S. Economic textbook or financial textbook. Imagine how terrifying this is for China as a major power, right? So nowadays we push the China knowledge and textbook autonomy, right? We produce in the past 5 years, especially, we produce more and more China political science textbook, China economics textbook, China financial textbook, China sociology textbook, China law textbook, something like that. And even worse, I tell you another very palpable things. Over the past 30 years, nearly 1 million young Chinese people have studied abroad every year, but more than 40% of them went to the United States. Many of them were among the best and most clever students in the Chinese university. After gaining their master's and doctorate degree in the United States, they stand there and serve the United States. And we all know one very interesting data. More than 30% of AI scientists in Silicon Valley have their undergraduate degree from China. So sometimes I have a joke that in the past 7 or 8 years, we have the very serious China-US high-tech war, right? But this so-called high-tech war between China and the US essentially is a war between Chinese people in China and the Chinese people in the United States. So this is also abnormal, right? So therefore, you mentioned the de-Americanization of education means bringing China education development back to a normal condition and maintaining a normal development relationship. We certainly support young Chinese people studying in the United States, and we welcome American students to study in China. However, this kind of exchange cannot evolve into excessively dependence. So now, President Trump is refusing more Chinese students from studying in the United States and prohibiting Chinese students from studying STEM subject in the United States. I have to say thank you, President Trump. No problem. More and more distinguished Chinese students, they stay in the Chinese universities and serve China in the future. So from this perspective, both China and the United States are seeking a new educational position under new historical conditions. So I think this new positioning of bilateral relationship will be beneficial to the future development of both countries. So in short, I think, back to your question, Chinese education must also follow its own path. China have its own, China has to have its own knowledge system, ideological system, disciplinary system, textbook system, and theoretical system, and cultivate more high quality and high level talents who truly serve China, instead of sending many high level and high quality talents to United States and to serve US. I think this is the education new normal. So I really appreciate Professor Dingson. You give me the opportunity to explain deeply about the de-Americanization. The de-Americanization, I emphasize again, de-Americanization is not equal to decoupling from US. De-Americanization just means that we will be back to a normal relationship with America. We don't want to dependent on US as the past. So I think this normal relationship to the US will be beneficial for each other. So that's my key point.